Clemens Heni és director del Centre Internacional de Berlín per l'Estudi de l'Antisemitisme. És investigador també del Centre per a l'Estudi de l'Antisemitisme del Centre Vidal-Sassoon, que està adscrit a la Universitat Hebrea de Jerusalem. Alhora ha fet una recerca sobre la memòria de la Shoah per la Yale University. La seva tesi doctoral, de fet, va fer una anàlisi científica de, per un cantó, la identitat nacional, l'antisemitisme i l'antiamericanisme en la cultura política d'Alemanya. I recordem que avui, la ponència d'avui justament és sobre la cultura política no només d'Alemanya, sinó d'Europa. Ell és politòleg, graduat alhora en ciències polítiques i en el que es coneix com a estudis culturals, Cultural Studies, i ha publicat llibres com L'antisemitisme, un fenomen específic. Hem de saber, o les persones que fem recerca sobre antisemitisme, si un dels errors que ens adonem és que es posa l'antisemitisme com si fos un racisme qualsevol altre, sense fer distincions i sense adonar-se'n de les singularitats que té. I, de fet, els acadèmics o els experts ho veiem de dues altres maneres. Uns pensen que és un prejudici diferent, com el sexisme, el racisme o altres, o bé que és un tipus de racisme però que té unes singularitats que el fan específic i per tant cal analitzar-ho de forma específica. I un altre dels llibres és sobre l'antisemitisme i la història d'Alemanya. Jo crec que amb aquesta presentació pot començar a fer la seva ponència, la seva dissertació, Clemens Heni. Endavant.
Now it works, okay. So thank you again for this kind introduction, and also for inviting me to come to Barcelona, which is a pleasure. And I also would like to thank the other organizers like the Baruch Spinoza Foundation and the supporters all over this region and Spain and Catalonia. I've seen there are a couple of Jewish organizations and also political organizations from Spain and Catalonia, which I think is really very important. As far as I understood today, it is really not common that there is an exhibition about Jews or anti-Semitism in Spain. And there is also, it's not very common to have this kind of seminars or research seminars or congresses in Spain or in Barcelona on the topic of Jews, anti-Semitism or Israel. So it's very important that this is the third conference in a row. As far as I understood, last year and the year before there have also been the same kind of seminars. Last year one of my friends, Robert Wistrich, was a speaker. So it is already an established institution, obviously in Barcelona, to have these seminars, and I wish you the best in the next years to have this seminar series going on. I just distribute a paper which is not the paper I will actually read today, but it's kind of a handout, so all of you have something, at least in English, in hands for today and perhaps the future, which is based on what I understand what anti-Semitism today in the 21st century mainly is. But of course I have at least made or tried to make a short introduction specifically dealing with Barcelona and Spain. And of course, I mean, it's difficult to have a kind of talk which wants to have at least some reception in this country without mentioning football or sports. So I will mention both sports and football. But first I mention Real Madrid. I know, of course, it's easy to bash Real Madrid in this city, but I think it's not about the team itself this time. This is about what happened in May with the basketball team and its supporters in Madrid, It was mentioned earlier this day that there have been something like 18,000 tweets or anti-Semitic remarks in social media by supporters of Real Madrid when Madrid lost this basketball game in the EuroLeague final against the Israeli team Maccabi Tel Aviv. The strange story is, of course, what would have happened if any other team, let's say from England or from Lithuania, would have won? Would have there been the same kind of 18,000 anti-Lithuanian, because Lithuania is very good in basketball, you know. So would have there been 18,000 anti-Lithuanian racist comments? I don't know, I don't hope so, but I fear there won't have been 18,000 anti-Lithuanian comments after a Lithuanian team would have won against Real Madrid. So anti-Semitism obviously is kind of part of what we call in political science a socioculture already for several of these supporters of Real Madrid basketball, because socioculture means it is an established paradigm where people analyze the world. In this, I mean, it's not analyzing, but it's a kind of resentment which is so deep in the hearts and feelings of these supporters of a famous team that they just, without analyzing what they are doing perhaps, they are just tweeting and promoting anti-Jewish remarks. Very horrible. I mean, we have written their pro-Holocaust statement, which was really shocking. So first of all, I wanted to start with pro-Holocaust remarks in Germany, which I thought is also very shocking. But obviously, the same happens in Spain. Because, of course, Germany also has pro-Holocaust remarks. Holocaust denial was yesterday. These days, we have pro-Holocaust remarks. The first time I realized this in a massive way, several hundreds or even thousands of people, was in 2010 after the interception of the terror ship Mavi Marmara by the Israeli army, a Turkish ship delivering supposedly aid for the poor Gazans. In fact, it was just a propaganda ship, and even the United Nations at some point understood that this was not a legal action by this Turkish ship. But there have been a remarkable amount of mostly Muslim, Turkish, and Arab Germans, native German, born in Germany, most of them. As you can see in their writing, most of them writing in German, some of them in Turkish or Arabic, but most of them have been living their entire life in Germany. And they had been making pro-Holocaust remarks, which is kind of shocking. I mean, they have not said the Holocaust did not happen. They have said, well, we are happy the Holocaust happened, but unfortunately Hitler didn't succeed to do the full job. This was 2010, and this year it was even worse, because 2010 it was just on Twitter and Facebook, now Facebook mostly, and this year it was on the streets. So I don't know what happened in Barcelona in July this year, but Berlin, for example, where my center is based, we have faced perhaps the most anti-Semitic rallies ever since 1945. Because we have seen mobs really attacking we are talking about tiny pro-Israel and pro-Jewish rallies, and these tiny groups have been attacked by mostly Muslim and Arab demonstrators, chanting that Hitler was right and the Holocaust was okay, and to gas the Jews. My second example, which is more closely related to this city, and which perhaps will not get so very much positive reception, is the fact that FC Barcelona is supporting the Qatar Foundation, as you all know. If you look at Messi and all these players and their tricots, they have Qatar, promoting Qatar on their T-shirts. This is all the more astonishing because people who are following football, they know very well that usually Barcelona was known that they don't make promotion for any kind of advertisement. I mean, they just had UNICEF or nothing on their tricots, so they were very proud of being just promoting Barcelona itself. But since 4 years, they have been promoting Qatar. And the question is if this is the best choice. If we look what the policies of this tiny country in the Middle East looks like. I'm currently working as an editor for a brand new German Jewish monthly, which is called the Jüdische Rundschau, which was actually a journal, a very famous journal from German Jewry until 1938. In our latest issue from October, we have one picture which I just want to show you, just for the record. I mean, you cannot see it, but it's for the record, it's here. You see, and Gerald Steinberg, actually, I don't know if he's here, he questioned how many countries are in the EU. It's actually one country, Germany, and 27 an annex. That's what we call it in Germany. So, I mean, I hope you understand the irony, but it's not an anti-Spanish remark. It's just, I mean, in Germany, people feel like this. Germany and 27 other small countries. So, the chancellor of this one country leading the European Union is Angela Merkel, and she had a handshake with Sheikh Tamim on September 17th in Berlin. And this Sheikh Tamim is a young guy. He's wearing like Armani-style coats, a very, very nice-looking guy, smiling. And he's young also. He looks like an attractive young man. But I mean, his attraction is also supporting Hamas and all these really nasty people promoting one of the most dangerous tropes when it comes to Israel. I mean, they are living in Qatar. And I myself dealt with another person, perhaps the leading Sunni Islamist ideologue. His name is Yusuf al-Qaradawi. He's an old man, born in 1926, I think. He is, in fact, you can look up on the internet, the leading, in terms of authority, the leading Sunni Islamist authority. And he is a moderate. He is called a moderate by leading Islamic studies scholars in Germany. I dealt with this. I wrote a book on this a couple of years ago. And for example, he is moderate, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, because he is allowing females to commit suicide bombing, which is moderate, because a hardcore Islamist would not allow a female to commit suicide because without the allowance of her father or husband. And Yusuf al-Qaradawi is very moderate, so he is allowing females, unmarried or married females, without the allowance of their husband or father to commit suicide bombing. And he's even more moderate, this is even anti-Islamist, because he's allowing these females to do these suicide bombings without a headscarf. Because according to him, in the Quran, you can be against some Islamic laws if it's helpful for the jihad. So this is, of course, his interpretation of the Quran. This is, of course, his Islamist view. But Yusuf al-Qaradawi has been living in Qatar for many decades, and they know this very well. So perhaps there should be some discussions why Qatar Foundation, which is closely related to this very tiny country. You're talking about a country with 300,000 inhabitants. It means Qataris, and there are some 700,000 or even more foreign workers, so-called foreign workers from other countries, which are treated very badly, mostly from Asia. Asia means Bangladesh or Pakistan and that kind of countries. And of course, you know all that there's a big discussion in terms of football, again, football, if the World Cup should really be held in this country, Qatar, in 2022, which is, of course, ridiculous in terms of sports because, I mean, there is not really a huge sport culture there, taking 300,000 inhabitants, and the temperature. But let me come to a more positive example when it comes to Spain. And I just have seen a video online recently with a former prime minister from Spain, José María Aznar, where he discussed with a famous scholar in Islamic studies from Philadelphia, United States, Daniel Pipes, the current stance on the Middle East and support for Israel from a non-Jewish perspective. This is important because Aznar is not a Jew, but he is very supportive of Jews and the state of Israel. And Aznar is, of course, a very well-known European politician. He was a former prime minister of a European country, Spain. And when he started his Friends of Israel initiative, that's the name of it, in 2010, he obviously had the intention and he said this in this debate with Daniel Pipes a couple of months ago, he had the intention to gather a kind of other celebrities or famous politicians, diplomats, scholars, and other people around him, so that the Jewish world and Israel can see there is a substantial support for Israel from non-Jewish activists, politicians, or ex-politicians and scholars, in this part, particularly in Europe. But he has also, I think, supporters from Latin America and other parts of the world. And then, at the end of my introduction, of course, I already mentioned the Gaza war this year in July was for sure proof that anti-Semitism is a real big problem, not just for Israel but in the Jewish state, but also in Europe. I mentioned pro-Holocaust statements, which we have not even known from neo-Nazis. I know quite well about neo-Nazis. I mean, as Xavier mentioned, I wrote a PhD about right-wing extremism and neo-Nazis in Germany from 1970 until 2005. So I dealt with Holocaust denial and Holocaust distortions from a right-wing extremist perspective. So I know this kind of debates, and most neo-Nazis in Germany would not dare to support the Holocaust in public, because, I mean, that's illegal. But obviously these young Islamists or Muslims have no problem. I mean, I have seen personally Islamists on the street vis-a-vis the police saying Hitler was right, which is illegal in Germany, actually. You cannot say this. They did it. So they have no fear. Neo-Nazis would not say this. A neo-Nazi, usually a German neo-Nazi, would not say in front of a policeman or woman, well, Hitler was right. Usually not. So this is a really change of political culture that some people in Europe, also in France and the UK, I don't know about Spain, but in the UK we have the same story with pro-Hitler statements. UK is perhaps the worst when it comes to hardcore Islamist and anti-Semitic rallies. And this kind of changing political culture is troubling, and therefore it's very important to have this kind of conferences to make awareness and to raise awareness for all of us that anti-Semitism is a real problem for the political culture of the European Union or Europe as a whole, and the rest of the world, of course, also. So what is anti-Semitism in our world? In my view, I have three main categories of anti-Semitism. This is hatred of Jews, hatred of the Jewish state of Israel, and the distortion of the Holocaust. I will try to analyze these three main categories a little bit more deeply. You can see this on my paper with my three categories. And I would like to start with the first category, which is old-style anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism up until the Holocaust, 1945, but it still exists today. I have listed as number one of the oldest anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic resentments. This is anti-circumcision. You already find in antiquity sources that the non-Jewish world, particularly in Alexandria and other today Egypt cities and parts of the Middle East, that there have been resentment against a specific Jewish monotheistic way of religion, including the ritual or the culture of circumcision. So this is very old, and unfortunately, as you might all know, we have had in the last years several pretty nasty anti-Judaism remarks in Europe, in Germany. I don't know in Spain if there have been discussions about circumcision in the same way. In Germany, we had 2 years ago, in 2012, we had a very aggressive climate thanks to a rule of a court in Cologne, which was based actually on a Muslim circumcision case, which was circumcision badly made by a bad doctor. But immediately, and this was the anti-Semitic content, immediately the public didn't turn about Muslims and their way of doing circumcision, because they don't do it with a baby, they do it much later with boys, age 3, 4 to 8 or 10 or even older. So it was not about Muslims. Immediately the public agitated against Judaism and the archaic ritual of the Jews. So this very old, thousands of years old, resentment against Judaism was very active just 2 years ago in Germany, and there have been other countries in the European Union, like Norway, which there have been debates about the Shechtjat, that means the kosher slaughtering, and also about circumcision. And in the Netherlands, there have also been debates about this. It's important to mention this as, for example, one of the supposedly pro-Jewish or pro-Israel politicians in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders. He's from a far-right party, the Freedom Party in the Netherlands, and he's seen as someone who is fighting for liberal values and the Western world and Israel. But he was very aggressive against the circumcision also. And in Germany, we have the same story. We have far-right groups or blogs and organizations who pretend to be pro-Western, pro-civilization, pro-Israel, but they were very nasty, very aggressive against the circumcision just 2 years ago. So sometimes the same people who pretend that they are pro-Israel, they are very anti-Jewish, which is a very strange story. We even had left-wingers, which is the most strange. It's a tiny group of people, so it's not comparable to all the other groups I just mentioned, but it's still, there are a few left-wing pro-Israel people, and some of them are anti-circumcision, so they are anti-Jewish in a way and pro-Israel. So very strange, but it's existing. The number two in my from category 1, number 2 of second form of anti-Semitism, Jews as Christ killer. I mean, that's a classic. Of course, it was mentioned today by several speakers, I think, and we still have it today. I mean, mostly in some Catholic circles in Europe, and also among some Protestant circles in the United States. This is distributed, but it's not, I think, not as well known as, for example, the anti-circumcision in Germany, for example. Jews as Christ killer is a topic for some extremist circles, but I don't think that is in a mainstream topic. I don't know about Spain, but it is always a topic which might show up. For example, in this issue, which I just mentioned, the Jüdische Rundschau, we have an interview with an Arab Jew, Rachel Waba. She's living in California. She's something like 65 years old, and she grew up as an Arab Jew. Her parents are both from Arab countries. I think her father is from Egypt and her mother is from Iraq. And she was born in the 40s. She grew up in Japan, in a Catholic school, so obviously in the 50s. And she, as a Jew, as an Arab Jew, being born to Arab Jews in India, then living in Japan, she realized that it's really different to be Jew or not Jew. For example, when she was 8 or 10 years old, her Christian Japanese teacher always said to her, "Oh, well, be silent, you killed Jesus." So when there was any kind of debate, she was silenced in school in Japan in the 50s because her people, the Jews, killed Jesus. So that is obviously, I mean, I don't know what today happens in Christian schools in Japan. That would be, of course, a research topic, but at least for Rachel Waba, this was not really a nice time as a child growing up as a Jew in Japan in a Catholic school. Number 3 is a hashrer, the eternal Jew or wandering Jew. There is also a Spanish term for it. This is, I think, Hebreo errante. Is it possible? Hebreo errante, the wandering Jew, something like this? Errante. Yeah. So this is also a very old anti-Jewish trope based on the fact that a Jew supposedly did not allow Jesus to rest. It was obviously thousands of years ago when Jesus still lived. Didn't allow him to rest with his cross on his back. So the man who didn't allow him was supposedly a Jew. So he was obviously not nice to Jesus because Jesus had a cross on his back. So he would like to have a rest. He was not allowed. Therefore, the Jews have been sent to wandering the earth forever. This is also a very well known, but today I think also just in extremist circles promoted idea of anti-Semitism. The next form is also very old, but it's much more common today. This is the blood libel. Number 4, Jews accused of killing innocent non-Jewish Christians. And since 1840, this is probably exactly since 1840, there is also the saying that Jews might be killing Muslims, because in 1840 there was the infamous Damascus affair in Syria, today's Syria, where Jews were accused of having killed a boy, which was not true. Today, as many of you perhaps know, the blood libel is distributed by many NGOs, by media, mostly in the Arab and Muslim worlds. And number 5 is a more complex, actually, dimension of anti-Semitism: Jews accused of being behind capitalism and money. This is even Karl Marx, which you can see in the exhibition, who was Jewish, born Jewish. But Karl Marx himself, I dealt with this in my book, where most of these actually tropes are analyzed, not in this way of 20 categories, but in a more analytical way, in a more longer way. But I dealt with, in a few pages, with Marx also. Because you can already see with Marx in 1844 that he was saying that a specific group of people, the Jews, and money are responsible for all evils of capitalism. And at the time, he already considered capitalism as very evil. And what is more frustrating, I think, from a sociological point of view, is that despite the fact that Marx changed his view, I'm familiar with his work, so if you look at his work later than 1844, like 1858 or in Capital in the 60s, he did no longer analyze the Jews of being responsible for capitalism, because he understood that this was a mistake by himself without acknowledging this. But he was no longer saying it's a specific group of people being behind capitalism. But today we still have people who are saying this. Just one example is the dancing in Davos, which was when I started something like before that time dealing with anti-Semitism, but in 2003 it was a really infamous event in Switzerland at the World Economic Forum. You can find this perhaps online, because it was really a famous event insofar as leftists promoted one of the oldest or very old anti-Semitic tropes. It means the connection between Jews and money. They had a cow, a big cow, and they had people accusing people of being very evil at the time, 2003. Of course, Ariel Sharon, but also the American President George W. Bush. And this, I think, today in our world, where we have a lot of discussions about, I know this discussion very well, because we have a lot of Spanish immigrants today in Germany, and they all debate about the situation in Spain compared to Germany. So about the bad doings of capitalism in Spain, they are saying, and there's always the dangerous trope that some people say that a specific group of people who is ruling the world, which will come to our next point, like the Jews, are responsible for the evils of capitalism. And number 6, the conspiracy myths, already mentioned today by some speakers, like Gerald Steinberg, is of course a very specific, because Xavier mentioned we have to distinguish between racism or sexism and other forms of discrimination and anti-Semitism, which is a lethal thing, a lethal obsession, which is a book title of Robert Wistrich, who spoke here last year. The anti-Semitism is very specific because it aims at a destruction of an entire people and not just about discrimination, which is bad enough. I mean, we know of discrimination of all kinds of people, like black people all over the world, which is a horrible thing. But it usually does not have the intention to destroy an entire people. There is no movement to destroy all blacks, for example. But there is racism against blacks. But that's a difference. But there is a movement to destroy all Jews. And Hamas is promoting this, for example, terrorist group Hamas. And because they really believe there is a conspiracy by the Jews, which is mostly based on the protocols of the Elders of Zion from the early 20th century, which is a Russian forgery. But it is seen, and this is a serious problem, it is seen as a real thing by many people. If you go to all kinds of bookshops in Istanbul or in Cairo, all over the Middle East, also perhaps in Barcelona or in Germany, also in Malaysia, there are people who are distributing this pamphlet in all kinds of languages, in Malayan, in Arabic, in German, in Turkish, and promoting the fact that Jews are ruling the world. And there have been so really ridiculous, it sounds funny, but it's ridiculous and dangerous tropes in these protocols that, for example, Jews are undermining cities by constructing underground trains. I mean, that would mean, for example, Barcelona is threatened to be destroyed or ruled by the Jews because there is underground in Barcelona, like in Berlin. And this move, 1905, it was published roundabout. They had one paragraph is reading that the underground is ruled by the Jews to destroy cities from within, because it's very dangerous. It's underground, you can't see them immediately, you have to go downstairs, and then you can see, oh, there's a train, what are they doing with these trains? Okay. So these are, I think, and perhaps some of you have even more examples of other rather old style but still existing anti-Semitic moves. I just mentioned to Xavier this month, and this might be interesting for a Spanish audience, as some of you might read Portuguese also. I know of a leading scholar from Brazil, Maria Tucci. She's a professor at the University of, I think, Sao Paulo. And she published a book about the 10 anti-Jewish myths. In Portuguese, I think, in Brazil, but it's probably available also in Spain this month. So this is worth reading, I think. I mean, I just know an abstract from a friend in English, but I've seen the book in Portuguese, but I think this looks very interesting, particularly because she's dealing with myths, with old myths, anti-Jewish resentment, which is still existing today, not only in Brazil, but also in Spain, Europe, and other parts of the world. So my second category is much more specific, actually, and there might be several examples not well known here. So I hope you find a point to understand this, and it's interesting. So Holocaust distortion is one form, a specific form of anti-Semitism after the Holocaust, after the Shoah. And the first form, which I have listed here as number 7, is a very strange form. This is projecting German guilt onto modernity. Okay, that means it is not, it's very beginning, it's something like 1949 from Martin Heidegger, which is until today one of the leading philosophers of the 20th century, unfortunately, and obviously a German, he was a Nazi party member, but that's not the case. The case is that his philosophy was very much Nazistic, as Emmanuel Faye, a French philosopher, has shown most recently a couple of years ago, perhaps also in Spanish translation, I think. I'm not sure. Emmanuel Faye, a very, very important book about the anti-Semitism of Martin Heidegger. And Heidegger said that there is not really a difference between the Holocaust, he did not use the term Holocaust, but he was aiming at the Holocaust, and motorized agriculture. Okay, that means most modern societies, industrial societies all over Europe, North America at the time, already had motorized agriculture. I mean, we know this, that he was aiming particularly at the United States, but also in Germany, of course, at the time, there was agriculture that was completely different to the Middle Ages until the early 20th century. Where you have been working with horses or with all kinds of animals, with cows, and handmade works, and then there was the start of motorized agriculture, which for him, he was a very, let's say, reactionary modernist, because he was living in a modern time, and he was using the modern, for example, technology of radio in Nazi Germany, but he was saying that the Holocaust was not much different to that kind of agriculture which was motorized, which is, of course, an extreme distortion of what happened during the Holocaust. Just because it was done with industrial methods, it's not the same as producing products for consume as agriculture does. In recent years, but ever since 1945, but particularly in the last 10 years, Germany has faced, and I don't know if there have been any reception of this discussion in Spain, for example, Germany has been framed as a victim of a so-called bombing Holocaust. That means the Germans themselves portray them with the term bombing Holocaust, more or less. A neo-Nazi, his name is Apfel, he's now working actually in a restaurant in Spain, in Mallorca. He's one of the leading German neo-Nazis, and he's working in Mallorca. He has no problem living there. This Holger Apfel, he used the term something like 9 years ago, bombing Holocaust, at an event in Parliament. He was an elected politician at the time in Saxonia. But also other people like mainstream Boulevard Daily, the Bild-Zeitung, that's perhaps you have similar journals or dailies in Spain. So the Bild-Zeitung, leading daily in Germany, Boulevard Daily, they promoted, which is unusual for a Boulevard Daily, they promoted a more half-academic book by Jörg Friedrich, who used, for example, the term crematoria for the city of Dresden. Implicitly saying what happened to the Germans when the Royal Air Force from Britain bombed Germany during the Second World War was more or less the same than what happened in Auschwitz to the Jews. And this is, of course, it's not a denial, but it's a very sophisticated form of anti-Semitism, because it's saying, well, in a way, Germans suffered like Jews. I mean, if Dresden was a crematoria, so we know in the crematoria, Jews have been burned in Auschwitz, so in a way, Germans have been Jews in Dresden. That is what he was saying, but it's very sophisticated, perhaps with the more outspoken anti-Semitism in Spain, this might not be a form of anti-Semitism very applicable for Spain, because it's very sophisticated and very typical for German. Same holds for Holocaust of expulsion. The Holocaust of expulsion, this is a kind of connection in some circles from the Nakba, so-called Nakba of the Palestinian people and the Germans, because in Germany, and this is a mainstream framework in Germany, that the Germans compare themselves more or less with what happened to Jews. If they say, well, there was, in a way, not exactly the same, but it was a Holocaust of expulsion. I mean, the Germans from the East were expelled, particularly by Czechoslovakia and Poland. Number 8 is also perhaps a not well-known form, which I think, of anti-Semitism in our world, dealing with the Holocaust and the distortion of the Holocaust. If people are using and abusing the word Holocaust for all kinds of things. I've mentioned here some, for example, biological Holocaust. These are all terms from books, from NGOs, from promotion events, biological Holocaust, atomic or nuclear Holocaust. High-tech Holocaust. Nuclear Holocaust actually was used already something like 35 years ago in the late 70s. I don't know what the situation in Spain at the time was, but in Germany it was a very, very big debate at the time, with a lot of NGOs being involved, a lot of street fights between hardcore leftists and the state when it comes to nuclear power plants. And then there was, of course, the Pershing II, that means missiles coming from the United States being put into Germany in the Cold War, and they were saying, which was a really important thing, again, for political culture to understand why did the Germans invent that term at the time, because this was after the screening of Holocaust, the series Holocaust, which was screened in Germany, perhaps in Spain, I don't know, in January 1979, something like 8 months after it was screened in the United States, the first film series which was dealing with the Holocaust for mainstream media. So it was very important at the time. And in Germany, there was a very strange reception. Millions of people have seen the film because at the time there have just been 3 channels on TV. Today, impossible for most people, but at the time there were 3 TV channels in Germany. There was no private TV, just state-sponsored TV. Perhaps in Spain it was similar at the time, 1979. So most people have seen the series at one time or another in their life. And immediately after this screening, some like atomic Holocaust terms occurred in the public, not dealing with the Holocaust, but dealing with the fear of nuclear power plants. I mean, of course, you can protest nuclear power plants, but why protest them with combining the terminology of the Holocaust, which obviously happened, with something that did not happen at all, and which just says, well, perhaps we all, that means the Germans or Europeans, could become murdered Jews like the Jews have been murdered in the real Holocaust. So there was a fear and talk of, there were books about the nuclear Holocaust. Until today, but today I think nuclear Holocaust is no longer up to date because most people don't protest this power plants anymore, at least not with that terminology. What is used until today is, for example, terms like, for the animals, it is like Treblinka. If you eat a beefsteak or so, this is for an animal like Treblinka. This is the ideology of a famous organization, PETA. Perhaps you know it also in Spain. I think there's a pro-animal organization, and they had very strange, and I think this is promoting secondary, what we call secondary anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism after the Holocaust. So this organization was promoting the accumulation of animals and Jews. I mean, they had posters showing animals in caves, whatever, and on the other photo you see Jews in concentration camps. So, I mean, this goes without words, but for them it was kind of, they wanted to make a provocative action, and they did it, but this was, of course, an abuse of the term Holocaust. The number 9 is a very academic debate, but also related to several NGOs and the work, how do we consider history more generally? And this leads us to the specificity of the Holocaust and the Shoah again. Because, as I mentioned in number 9, the denial of the uniqueness of the Shoah is, for example, based in post-colonial literature. That means people are comparing or equating the colonial times with the Holocaust, saying what happened to the Jews was nothing new at all. It all happened before to the blacks and the Native Americans and other people, slaves in Africa, which is obviously not true, which is not denying that there have been murder of a lot of people during the times since Columbus arrived in what he called New India. It was a complete different story when it comes to Holocaust, which was the intentional murder of an entire people. And there was, of course, never the intention to kill an entire people. Even during the horrible slave trade, which, by the way, was not just a Christian thing, a slave trade, there was also a huge Islamic slave trade during the Middle Ages and the early modern times, which is not a big discussed. There have been discussions in Africa about this, in sub-Saharan Africa, about the Islamic slave trade and also the Christian slave trade. I just learned in school, perhaps in Spain it's the same story, I just learned about the Christian slave trade. I was never mentioning that there was also an Islamic slave trade of blacks. There was. So this was a horrible story, but it was completely different to the Holocaust. And I just mentioned here some book titles. Recent books promoted by leading scholars in the field, like Kaiser's Holocaust or From Windhoek to Auschwitz, which does not stand hold if someone is familiar with what happened in German Southwest Africa in the early 20th century. Number 10 is a very European phenomenon, particularly when we deal with Eastern Europe. This is red equals brown. That means the communists are as evil as the Nazis, which obviously was not true if you look at the record, because there have been people who installed and constructed Auschwitz concentration camps, the Germans, and there have been people who liberated the few people who have been liberated in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and this have been the Red Army and the Soviet Union. This is nothing to say about crimes of Stalin, who himself was for sure anti-Semitic, but this is a lot to say that there is no equivalence between red and brown. But this actually is what is called the Prague Declaration. It was a declaration made in Prague a couple of years ago in 2008, saying that European textbooks have been overhauled and rewritten in terms of we have two similar evil movements in the 20th century. One was brown, were the Nazis, and one was red, and these were the communists or socialists, and both are evil. And this is distorting in particular what happened in Eastern Europe. Because it's interesting, and a couple of scholars dealt with this, like David Katz from Lithuania, or Efraim Zurov, who is head of the Simon Wiesenthal Center's Jerusalem office. And they dealt with this topic a lot, that in Eastern Europe, like Lithuania or Latvia, there has been a lot of collaboration during the Holocaust. Several groups of anti-Semites killed Jews even before the Germans arrived in countries like Lithuania. And same holds for other countries like Ukraine. So it's interesting that today, where we should consider the collaboration of people who collaborated with the Nazis, that there is a movement to say, well, red and brown were equal, and you have even a rehabilitation of former Nazi murderers in countries like Lithuania or Latvia. I myself have witnessed what was shocking to me, a SS march in Latvia, in the capital Riga, a couple of years ago, where I've seen an 89 or 93 years old former SS man marching through the street, honored by local politicians and the people, and there were something like 40 protesters. And this is a EU country. This is not nothing. I mean, it's a small country, Latvia, but still, it's a EU country. They get funding, and they get support by the European Parliament, actually, for this kind of equation between red and brown. So the next years and decades, I think, will show a lot of this kind of what we call in scholarship secondary anti-Semitism. That means distortion of what happened in the Holocaust if you compare this, what the Soviet Union did. Number 11, talking about Islamophobia and comparing racist attacks against immigrants, which exist on a huge level in most European countries, including Muslims in Germany and elsewhere, to genocidal anti-Semitism. This is again what I already mentioned. You have to distinguish, and this is important from a scholarly point of view, to distinguish between anti-Semitism as a genocidal movement to kill an entire people for all kinds of myths. I already mentioned several of these very old myths. This is completely distinctive and different to racism, which is based on resentment, which is also based on lies or on all kind of different strange and bad views on immigrants, on all kind of people who are different or supposedly different. But there is no intention, there has never been the intention from racists to kill an entire people. So it's a different structure. If you talk about racism and if you talk about anti-Semitism. So, I mean, if for example, a fan of whatever group is throwing a banana at Dani Alves from Barcelona, this is racism. I think this occurred several times, or at least once. Other players with a background from Africa have also been attacked in the same way that bananas have been thrown in Italy. It happens sometimes also in Germany and other countries in England. This is racism, and this occurs on a regular basis, and particularly in football. So this is horrible, but I think it's different to, for example, these anti-Semitic tweets, pro-Holocaust tweets, after Real Madrid lost the game against Maccabi Tel Aviv. So I think you can see the difference between this kind of anti-Semitic tweets and statements which urge people to destroy an entire people, and racism, which is horrible and has to be fought on a daily basis, but which is not calling for the destruction of all people like Alves. I think that there's a difference, which is not to say that the situation for him is horrible. But for scholarly research, I think there has a lot of research to be done to emphasize the distinction between racism and anti-Semitism. Number 12, Holocaust denial by neo-Nazis, Islamists, and others. I already said at the beginning of my talk, Holocaust denial is old-fashioned. It sounds strange, but it is old-fashioned because today we have a pro-Holocaust movement in a way. So this is, I mean, for example, the Iranian conference a couple of years ago, 2006, there was a conference in Tehran. At the time, there was still infamous Ahmadinejad ruling in Tehran, or being prime minister. So these Holocaust denial events are not really up to date, because we have much more hardcore pro-Holocaust statements, which I think is really shocking, because it was not, I mean, since, let's say 5 years ago, it was not really imaginable in the Western world that you have rallies and streets, perhaps in Barcelona, for sure in Berlin and Hamburg and Frankfurt, all over Germany, where people are praising Hitler. This was not really, you could not anticipate this 5 years ago. Today we have this kind of rallies. Of course, neo-Nazis joined these rallies, but as I mentioned, usually neo-Nazis are reluctant to praise Hitler in public, because neo-Nazis are very well aware of the law. They want to be with the law usually, because they don't like to go to prison. So let me just focus at the end on the perhaps most important. So I just want to give you some things to think about in the next days or months or years perhaps, about anti-Zionism and hatred of Israel. Anti-Zionism, I think, is, as Joel Steinberg emphasized, perhaps the most well-known and most dangerous form of anti-Semitism today, as it is aiming at the destruction of Israel as a Jewish state. It is important actually to say Israel as a Jewish state. This is my number 13, because there has been some Jewish anti-Zionism even prior to the establishment of the Jewish state, like Martin Buber or Hannah Arendt in the 1940s. I just have published this year another book in German. Perhaps there's a Spanish publisher doing it in Spanish, about critical theory and Israel, where I deal with Max Horkheimer and Judith Butler. Max Horkheimer is was a leading German Jewish philosopher of the so-called Frankfurt School or critical theory, and Judith Butler is today a leading so-called critical theorist, and she was awarded the Adorno Prize, which is one of the most well-respected prizes in the social sciences and humanities in Germany and Europe or worldwide 2 years ago. And Judith Butler is, in a way, walking in the footsteps of, for example, Hannah Arendt and others, Jewish thinkers. They say, well, there may not be a Jewish state because the terms state and Jewish are contradictory for them. So they say Jews are dedicated to wander the world. I mean, I mentioned the wandering Jews. So in a way, they are adopting the anti-Semitic myth that Jews always need to wander, but I think it's something lovely to do and to be in the diaspora. So Judith Butler is obviously very happy to live in California and not in Israel. But obviously, she's ignoring the something like 7 million Jews who are happy to live in Israel. And it's important in a way because, I mean, that's not a movement you will see on the streets. There are not big rallies promoting this kind of Jewish anti-Zionism on the street, because it's strange for people like in Barcelona, you won't see Jews fighting other Jews. It's a very strange story. But in academia, it's a very, very important topic to deal with. This is the reason I dealt with this, with the history of Zionism in the 30s and 40s in this book, because it's important. For example, Max Horkheimer, who was a traditional German Jew, being born in the late 19th century, and he grew up in a typical German Jewish environment, and then for him the shocking Holocaust was a turning point in his life. For all of Frankfurt School, it was a turning point, because obviously Enlightenment and what they saw as Western civilization did not prevent, perhaps even support, what happened during the Holocaust. But still, he at least tried, and this is not known by many scholars in the field, because not many people before me dealt with that topic, with Horkheimer and the critical theory and Zionism. They did not deal with the sources because Horkheimer was very supportive of the Jewish state. In those remarks you can find in his collected works. And Max Horkheimer is standing something like pars pro toto for a today no more existing, but at a time until the 60s, existing German Jewry, which was well aware that, of course, the state of Israel is now, after the Holocaust, the one and only place where Jews are really secure. Even someone, this has to be mentioned in parentheses, actually, just for some leftist revolutionaries which might exist in Barcelona, it's important to understand that someone like Herbert Marcuse, who was always fighting for the world socialist revolution, he was very much pro-Zionist. There is an interview with Herbert Marcuse in 1977 with a student journal in California, where he was saying very proudly that, of course, Israel has to be here to defend itself and to prevent a second Holocaust. Even at the time, he was anticipating something like Hamas, which at the time did not exist. So I think this kind of scholarly debates about Zionism will be very relevant in the future. The other parts, like 14 to 20, have already mentioned one way or another. For example, the BDS movement by Joel Steinberg and Al-Qaradawi I also have already mentioned. So yeah, I think this might be enough for perhaps some discussions. So yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Bueno, pues ahora començarem el torn de preguntas. Yo tengo una pregunta en particular. Quiero agradecer, digamos, toda esta categorización del antisemitismo por parte de Clemens Heni. Me quiero centrar en un aspecto que al menos, no en el resto de Europa Occidental, pero en España es bastante desconocido. En el punto 14, el antisionismo generado por Stalin y por la Unión Soviética hace muchas décadas atrás se traspasó fronteras, y ese discurso antisionista, que era la forma del siglo XX del prejuicio de la judeofobia, se trasladó a la Europa del Este. De la Europa del Este se trasladó a la Europa occidental en grupos trotskistas, maoístas, prosoviéticos, pero de allí, de lo que sería la extrema izquierda, pasó, al menos en el caso, digamos, español, no digo en toda Europa occidental, pero en el caso español, mucho más tarde pasó incluso a una parte, no digo todo el partido, pero a una parte de la socialdemocracia. Inclusive después pasó incluso al centro-derecha, en el caso del Estado español. Que no digo que sea lo que esté sucediendo ahora en el año 2014, pero ese discurso, hasta el punto de que incluso ese mismo discurso, si observamos, no sé, un cartel que recientemente vi de julio de este mismo año, un grupo de extrema derecha en España utilizaba exactamente el mismo discurso que digamos, punto 14, que se había creado muchas décadas antes, digamos, por parte de Stalin y la Unión Soviética. Es decir, ese cartel, por ejemplo, de la extrema derecha española, si hubiéramos tapado el logotipo, hubiera podido ser firmado por alguien de extrema izquierda o incluso de izquierdas, etc. O sea, esa transversalidad de un discurso que muchos desconocen, que su origen está en Stalin y en la Unión Soviética, digamos, es algo, podríamos decir, muy preocupante que se haya normalizado en la sociedad española. Que en otros países europeos también sucede, pero yo creo que no de forma tan grave como en el caso español. Como, por ejemplo, si abordamos el punto 8, en estos momentos, no utilizar el concepto de nacionalismo, porque en Alemania, digamos, es una palabra muy digamos, estigmatizada, pero si observamos las ideologías políticas en España, hay sectores del patriotismo español, utilizaré la palabra patriotismo, que utilizan la palabra nazi para referirse al patriotismo catalán, y hay sectores del patriotismo catalán que utilizan la palabra nazi para referirse al patriotismo español, y a la vez sectores de la izquierda que utilizan la palabra nazi para referirse a la derecha democrática, y sectores de la derecha democrática que utilizan la palabra nazi para referirse, digamos, a sectores de la izquierda. Es decir, de forma transversal, en el caso español, hoy, año 2014, el punto 8 está muy vigente, no solo con el concepto holocausto, sino con incluso con la palabra nazi. No neonazi, nazi. Bueno, era un poco para si se puede a nivel de política comparada, como experto además en el caso alemán, si se llega hasta este punto tan alto en el caso de Alemania respecto a lo que está sucediendo, por ejemplo, en el caso español, de la transversalidad del prejuicio a lo largo de las ideologías.
Thank you very much for this interesting question. It was like with Joel Steinberg an hour before that sometimes the question is better than the answer. So I don't know if I can answer it properly, but the cross-cutting between left and right is indeed a huge topic in Germany also. So we have, when it comes to Israel or Zionism and Jews, indeed also several tropes being disseminated by the left and today by the right, but also the other way around. When I mentioned, for example, Heidegger, who was obviously on the far right, comparing the Holocaust to agriculture in 1949. Today we have rather people from the left, like in post-structural philosophy, following people like Michel Foucault, using the same more or less terminology that the modernity was responsible and not anti-Semitism for the Holocaust, for example. When it comes to Zionism, you mentioned Trotskyism, which is of course very important, particularly in countries like England or United Kingdom. Where Trotskyism was a very powerful, until today I think, very powerful movement in the left. And what I think in Germany I can see sometimes right-wing people using the same terminology like left-wingers when it comes to Israel. For example, also the clothes. I mean, you know all the headscarf from Yasser Arafat, which he introduced in a way as a typical headscarf or headscarf for Arabs and Palestinians. So today it is used by neo-Nazis also. It was never, they would never have used it until 10 years ago, because I mean it was a symbol for being leftist, being pro-Palestinian, pro-Arab. So neo-Nazis usually are anti-Arab and anti-Muslim, so they detested it. But today they are using it because they see, oh well, the Muslims are also anti-Jewish. So even though neo-Nazis are not pro-Arab, they are anti-Arab, they are anti-Muslim, but still they see, perhaps at some point we can join forces and be anti-Jewish, because that's even more important to neo-Nazis than being anti-Muslim at some point. So at least when it comes to foreign policies. In domestic politics, it's different. For example, the same neo-Nazis who join a rally, and this happened actually in Germany, the same neo-Nazis who joined a rally against Israel or pro-Palestine with Muslims and Arabs, they joined the rally. The next day, when they see one of these Muslims, they would of course beat them on the streets because they don't like them being in Germany. If they consider them being in the Middle East and fighting the Jews, that's great. And in terms of nationalism, I'm not very familiar with the with Catalan and Spanish conflict. But of course, I understood that obviously both sides accused the other side from time to time of being more or less pro-Nazi, and used the language of the enemy. In Germany, we have, of course, because Nazi in Germany is the worst term. I mean, perhaps even worse than in Spain, I don't know. Perhaps here, it's fascist. I mean, the term fascist perhaps is the same like in Germany, Nazi. Because Spain was not Nazi, it was a fascist country at the time, long ago, but Germany was Nazi, and until today we have a Nazi legacy, which is much different. So Nazi in Germany is a term you cannot easily use for all kinds of enemies. Still, of course, people both from the left accuse right-wingers, and right-wingers sometimes use left-wingers, for example. Some right-wingers say if a left-winger is doing some ecological action which might be strange for a conservative, they say, well, this is like a Nazi style. For example, if they, I mean, which is stupid, because, for example, if they argue for not slaughtering animals because Hitler was a vegetarian, they say, you are a vegetarian Nazi, or the other way around. So this is a very strange use of this terminology. But no, I mean, your question for political culture in Europe is very important, because I think there is a trend, we call it in Germany querfront. In English, it's cross-cutting. I mean, that means they are joining particularly when it comes to conspiracy theories. We have a strange movement in Germany, and this is a movement which is related to the global occupying movement, which we have seen in the United States and all over Europe and in other parts of the world. And this occupying movement is based on all kinds of very strange conspiracy theories. I mean, perhaps you have known, for example, that aircraft, I mean, obviously they are using some kind of fuel to go into the air, and there are some people saying seriously that there is some chemicals in this, they call it chemtrails, some chemicals in this fuel which make several severe diseases among specific kinds of populations. And I really believe this. The same holds for 9/11. I mean, if we come to September 11 and conspiracy theories, or conspiracy myths, as we call it, I mean, it's a horrible story. We have best-selling authors in Germany. I don't know about Spain, but in Germany, for example, it would be interesting. I don't know if there are conspiracy theories about the Madrid bombings, for example, in 2004. About 9/11, we know a lot of them, and in Germany, people who write about this are best-selling authors. Best-selling means hundreds of thousands of books being sold based on conspiracy theories about 9/11. Is there similar? I mean, it's a question to all of you. Are there a similar movement or authors in Spain dealing with the Madrid bombings, for example? Yeah.
I have two questions, please. In English, I could have speak German, but let's do it in English to have a translation. Two questions, please. The first question, yes, the first question refers to the remark that totalitarianism, Gulag versus Vernichtungslager, Kampf der Extermini, cannot be equalized, cannot be compared. My question is, yes, of course, the quality of the genocide cannot be compared. My question is, the fact that the Allies, that the Western coalition did not know what happened behind the Iron Curtain, because, well, the Western world didn't know what happened exactly in Stalin's Gulag, what happened exactly in Romania, but they know what happened in Auschwitz. I can't imagine that the whole world, well, the Western world at that time, didn't know what happened in Auschwitz and didn't do the intervention, the military intervention. Well, they did it, but late, too late. And in the case of the Cold War, they didn't do it. So in my eyes, the difference between one killing of people, one killing of minorities, of human beings, crimes against humanity, the only difference in my eyes is that the international community have got a responsibility, and they didn't, they didn't cope to it at that time. That is my first remark on the, Hannah Arendt. Look at Romania, for example, at the Iron Guard, at Codreanu's Iron Guard. They were very, very pro-Zionist because they wanted to get rid of the Jewish people of Romania. And they support the Zionist Romanian organizations to emigrate to Israel. So we have to differentiate in the Eastern Europe, because yes, of course, you can equalize anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, yes, of course. But there are cases where you have to look a little bit, more differentiate. Thank you very much. That was the question. I just would like you to comment it or to answer it. Thank you very much for your patience.
Okay, thank you. Well, I can just make two short answers. Number one, the USSR never intended to kill a people. This is a historic record. They never intended to kill a people, period. Even in Ukraine, there was no intention. I dealt with this on scholarship in the last years. There was never the intention to kill an entire people. That is not meaning that there were people killed, of course. But most of these people have been political enemies or seen as political enemies, and that's a difference to a genocidal movement against the Jews. And number two, I mentioned that some Nazi anti-Zionism was already anti-Semitic. Nazi anti-Semitism was also anti-Zionist, which is the fact that perhaps the Iron Guard in Romania was not in the same way anti-Zionist as the Nazis have been. I don't know, but this is, this does not mean that the Iron Guard of Romania was a good organization. So of course there have been different kinds of Nazism or fascism in Europe at the time, and not all of them have been both against the Jews in Europe and against the Jews everywhere. So, yeah.
Dos preguntas más juntas, porque nos quedan 10 minutos justos.
Sí, gràcies. Senyor Clemens, moltes mercès per la seva conferència, la qual ha sigut molt descriptiva. Jo el que li vull fer és donar-li una petita referència i una informació prèvia al que vostè ha comentat avui respecte a la figura d'un primer ministre que vam tindre aquí. Resulta que hi ha hagut dos actes a l'estat espanyol, un en un poble que es diu Fries, de Burgos, i una a Gandia, protagonitzat, i el comentari ve arran que vostè ha dit que si a Alemanya algú, els nazis o els neonazis, i en aquest cas militants del partit que governa la primera ministra, l'Angela Merkel, fessin declaracions, o els seus militants fessin atreviment de teatralitzar, com s'ha esmentat en aquesta informació, en aquest poble de Burgos, el camp d'Auschwitz, el gassejament i la figura del Mengele, i a Gandia un regidor, és a dir, un càrrec públic del Partit Popular. M'ha vingut al fil aquesta d'això de floretes pel senyor Aznar, és com les 18.000 piulades que varen fer simpatitzants o socis del Real Madrid respecte, en fi, no cal dir el nom ni els cognoms. És a dir, aquí el que s'ha de qüestionar és que hi ha un president d'un club que té un nom, Florentino Pérez, i que s'ha de demanar responsabilitats perquè aquestes coses no succeeixin. És com el tema analític que vostè ha fet que aquest país, durant els anys 40 al 45, no era el nazisme, era un feixisme, però ull viu, era un feixisme col·laborador amb el règim genocida nazi d'Alemanya. I només volia dir-vos aportar aquest coneixement envers aquesta afirmació que heu fet respecte del primer ministre senyor Aznar, que, en fi, que té molt bones relacions amb l'estat d'Israel, la qual em congratula. Gràcies.
Una segunda pregunta y las juntamos.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. I very enjoyed the classification and the examples you gave. However, I do not agree with the two cases you mentioned, with the point 10 and 13. Point 10, I agree that there is often anti-Semitic ideas behind the red equals brown, but I wondered why you situated that in Eastern Europe, because I was in Germany at the high school, and it was the totalitarianism, the idea that in a circle, so left and right meet, was the dominant political ideology of that time in the 80s, 90s. So I would not situate that only in Eastern Europe. The first thing. And the second, I know that there was, before the Holocaust, the discussion in the Jewish community about Zionism. But I wonder why you say this is anti-Semitic, that people think, okay, of course they were fatally wrong, but that people thought in that time Jews could live in peace in Europe. So why do you think this was anti-Semitic?
Thank you very much. For the first question, to the gentleman in the back, I did not really get the connection between Aznar and Real Madrid. Is there any connection between Aznar and Real Madrid? Because you said that the president of Real Madrid, I don't know who is that, did not say anything against the tweets, right? Is this correct? So, because it should have been obviously a kind of huge scandal. That means if many of these tweets have been made by members of Real Madrid, of course, one could expect a president or the board of governors to say something. I don't know if there was not any mentioning, but of course it should have been important to say anything about this. The second question from you, it's very interesting. The second one with Zionism, of course it's not anti-Semitic at the time, that's true. It was of course not anti-Semitic in the 30s to be against a Jewish state. Today, I would say it's different, and I focus today on people like Judith Butler, who today promote ideas, obviously, who are old-fashioned, who are no longer valid in our world, in a post-Holocaust world. And it's really fascinating if you read Zionist discussions in the 30s and early 40s. It's very fascinating, at least what I discovered. For example, Kurt Blumenfeld, he's the mentor of Hannah Arendt. Kurt Blumenfeld was the Zionist leader of Germany in the 20s and 30s. And Kurt Blumenfeld is a very interesting person because he would have been considered today as a typical left-wing liberal. He was in the 20s for a binational state. That means he was in favor of Jewish-Arab consolidation and collaboration. But he himself witnessed as early as 1929 and in the 30s that the Arabs and Muslims already at that time were not really ready. Even there were a lot of Jewish people who were ready for collaboration with Arabs and with Jews and Muslims and Arabs, but the other side was not really ready for that. So there have been pogroms in Hebron in 29, and later there has been the upheaval of the Arabs in 1936 and 7. And even people like, and I have on my cover book, and I want to mention this because it is important to understand that it was not anti-Semitic at the time. Gershom Scholem, who is on the cover of my book, which is also featuring Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, famous German philosophers. Actually, Adorno, who is listed here also, according to Halachen, he is not really Jewish. I mean, his father was Jewish, his mother was Catholic, but he is considered as a Jewish philosopher. He himself, I mean, I am not aware of many sources where he himself considered Jewish, but he did not deny it, as far as I know the sources. But I mean, his father was Jewish, and of course he fled Nazi Germany because he would have been a victim due to his Jewish father. But he also left for political reasons because he was a leftist. But in the 20s, and Kurt Blumenfeld, there was discussion about binational ideas. So Zionism was very much discussed in the 20s among the Jewish movement, which was, of course, a huge movement at the time. You cannot compare this with today's discussion. There have been a lot of discussions among Jews, and it's difficult and different if people today, like Judith Butler, are praising ideas from the 20s and 30s who obviously are no longer valid. The second question was also interesting about Western Europe. Actually, I have a chapter in my book about Ernst Nolte. Ernst Nolte is a famous, unfamous German historian. He invented actually the trope that the Gulag was first and Auschwitz was later. So he was saying as early as in the 1970s, actually, that the Holocaust was nothing but a reaction to crimes made by the communists. So he's a hero, actually, of course, of all kinds of right-wing extremists in Germany, but Nolte was mainstreaming this trope when he wrote in the leading daily at the time, 1986, in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, the same trope that Stalin was first and Hitler was more or less just an answer to Stalin. So Western Europe invented the trope of red equals brown, mostly, I think, with the intention to whitewash the German crimes, and of course to say, well, it was not that bad because the Russians are at least as bad as the Germans. So for Germany, it's a very German debate. The Germans are, of course, happy. I don't know, in Spain, perhaps it's a similar story. If you can say, well, the other side is also very bad. If you don't have to blame the fascist regime in Spain alone, but because the communists or anarchists are also very bad. If you can say this, the way it is in Germany, it's done this way. And I'm also very happy, actually, that I forgot to mention this because as I understood you, the intention, of course I anticipated this, but I've heard it this morning, to have these seminars here on anti-Semitism is of course due to the nights of pogroms on November 9th, 1938. So last year and the year before and this year is always at the beginning of November, your seminar here in Barcelona. And I think this is very important to have this connection with anti-Semitism and the nights of pogroms. This year, in Germany, is very different because they, of course, are happy to forget what happened in the Holocaust, and they have a kind of 25 years of the end of the GDR, the Communist Democratic Republic, with the fall of the wall in Berlin. So in Germany this year in particular, but also the last 25 years, they have been much more celebrating that this 9th of November, which is accidentally the same day. They are happy, they celebrate this day, and they are eager to forget the anti-Semitic events from 1938. And they are not denying them, but they are distorting them, they are overshadowing them, and so that's how it works. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias, Clemens Heni. Y ahora, bueno, haremos un cuarto de hora de pausa, 15 minutos, y continuaremos con Alfredo Hidalgo, que nos hablará de la propagación de la nueva judefobia en el Estado español. Thank you so much.